Welcome, everyone. Let's get started today. Welcome to this wonderful weather. What happened to that? I want to know. That sun from yesterday. Welcome also to this talk in the series of talks that we're holding this week for Parenting Education Week here at the Hallie Ford Center at Oregon State University. My name is Megan McClellan, and I direct the Healthy Development and Early Childhood Research Core here. And I'm delighted to introduce my very good colleague, Dr. Katherine Pears, who collaborates with me on some work, but I'm here to talk about her very cool presentation that she'll be doing today called Supporting Children's First Teachers, Promoting School Readiness Through Parent Education. Dr. Pears is a senior scientist at the Oregon Social Learning Center. She studies school readiness in at-risk populations in terms of children and their families. She looks at children in foster care, children with developmental disabilities, and children from impoverished environments. Dr. Pears also studies early childhood experiences that shape self-regulatory skills and executive function abilities, and how these skills then subsequently translate into school readiness and school adjustment for young children, which is a really important and hot topic and one I'm very, very familiar with and have lots of affection for. Dr. Pears is a developer of a very cool intervention that she'll talk about, the KITS program, which is Kids in Transition to School program. It's a school readiness intervention that really focuses on early academics, literacy, math, as well as social, emotional, and self-regulation skills in children and school involvement. Also in parents, which is a really nice piece of that program. She heads up a number of federally funded efficacy trials and other research grants, including one of the KITS program, and also works in partnerships with a number of community organizations to increase school readiness in at-risk children. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Pears.
Thank you very much.
Oh, wait. Right. Sorry. I'm supposed to say that we are streaming this, and there are people that may be watching this around the state, and if they are, that if they have questions, they can enter them into their chat box, and we have someone here who will be collecting those. So if you're watching online, which we often have lots of people actually watch this online around the state, so please feel free to enter any questions into the chat box, and we'll have Dr. Pears answer them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Megan. Well, thank you all for coming, braving the suddenly ridiculously wintry weather out there. I know that this is typical of Oregon in May, but I still do not like it. So I'm going to talk to you today about how we can support parents to support their children's school readiness. And I'm going to start by just sort of giving you a brief primer in school readiness. I know I'm preaching very much to the choir here, but just reminding us all again why school readiness skills would be such a great point of primary prevention with kids, particularly kids in high-risk environments. So one of the things that we know from fairly robust literature now of prospective studies that have gone on for 20, 30, and more years is that how children enter school really has a big impact on how they continue through school. So not only how they do in elementary school, but also how they do in middle school, high school, whether they graduate, and then how they do as adults. So children coming into school are more likely to, with good literacy skills, good social skills, and good self-regulatory skills, the sort of holy trinity of school readiness skills, do better at academics as they progress through school. They do better with their peers. They're more likely to be able to share, cooperate, be able to enter groups without disrupting them. And that sort of rolls on into these more likely to graduate from high school, more likely to have high educational attainment, high occupational attainment, and then more likely to have some better psychosocial outcomes. For instance, kids who enter school with the skills that they need and are ready to learn are actually less likely to become drug users like 21 years later. So this is, if you're thinking about a high payoff point of primary prevention with kids who are likely to have difficulties in school, school readiness skills are the way to go. But school readiness skills are sort of they are germane to the child. skills within the child. So one could argue, okay, well, why don't we just intervene with that child? Why do we need to intervene with parents? Why would we want to educate parents? Why would we want to help them promote school readiness? Which, okay, sounds kind of like a dumb question, particularly to this audience. But understanding at least why we would use parent education, how we would use parent education to help parents better prepare children for school, lets us know perhaps where those points of intervention lie. So where we might best be able to put our resources to intervene with parents to help them. So when we look at how parents affect school readiness, one of the places, sort of the low-hanging fruit and how they do it, is that they actually work directly to promote school skills. And one of the big skills that you hear a lot about is helping parents promote early literacy through book reading. And I think this is one of the things that's been best advertised, really promoted and gotten out into the public, so that we are in fact a nation of book readers to our children. We do really well at that. But research has shown that it's not just the act of reading to children, it's the quality. It's how parents actually do this reading that actually makes a bigger difference. And so parents who do things like identify letters while they're reading to their children, talk about, yes, this is an A, talk about the sound that the A makes, what the A represents, shows you a picture, look, there's an apple. Parents who ask children about questions about the story as they go along. So they're promoting both having the children understand what they're reading, both comprehension, but they're also they're also promoting things like working memory, because they're having the child follow the thread of the narrative, remember facts from one page to the next page, and work it through the story. And parents who can do things like decontextualize, so draw inferences from that story to things that the child knows about in the bigger world, or in fact that the child doesn't know about, thereby kind of expanding the child's horizons, expanding their thinking. So parents can do so much teaching within the context of this storybook reading, and in fact it's been found that when they do that, then the children actually have better outcomes. But it's not necessarily self-evident. These are skills within book reading that parents need to be told about or have to be taught about, because they might not necessarily do them out of their own experiences themselves. Another way that parents affect, or parents directly teach the skills that kids need for school readiness, is to work with kids on their pro-social skills. And in fact, I found this interesting, that when parents were surveyed in a big national survey to find out what kinds of skills they thought were necessary for school readiness, actually more of them thought that kids would need to know how to share than thought that kids would need to know their alphabet. And parents are the big first teachers in terms of sharing. They control how children get out into the social world. They make the play dates. They watch over those play dates. They teach the basics. They talk about sharing. They talk about not hitting your friend because he just took your favorite helicopter. And they scaffold up those very complex behaviors. I mean, it's tough to share if you're 2 and this is your favorite helicopter, and you have to be able to make a number of steps, like even caring that your friend wants your helicopter. I mean, of course he does, but do I care? And then being able to do things like inhibit your impulse to grab the helicopter away from said friend when friend would like to borrow it, and come up with this other behavior of actually giving that helicopter to your friend, oh my, and then not having a temper tantrum. So these are complex behaviors that parents have to go step by step, and they have to know how to scaffold those up and teach them to children. And then parents work with children all the time on behavioral and emotional regulation. So those skills that teachers, in fact, think that they are most likely to believe that children don't have when they come into school, and in fact don't feel as confident about their own abilities to teach. So parents themselves, all through children's infancy and toddlerhood, provide the external controls. They say no, or not that, or here, let me distract your attention from this one thing. So they teach children to be able to step back, not touch that electrical socket. And they teach children to be able to move their attention from that really expensive vase that your Aunt Sarah gave you for your wedding to something else. Skills, if you think about, that they're going to need for school, because they're going to need to not leap up from their chair in the middle of whatever lesson they're having and do whatever they want to do. And they're going to need to be able to move their attention from probably the more interesting stuff going on outside sometimes to the teacher as she's talking. And parents do this all the time. The other thing that is maybe less evident in terms of what parents can do to prepare children for school is just to help them understand the transition itself. I mean, if you think about it, this is a huge transition in the life of children. They are taking a leap from being at home or being in a daycare or an early childhood education environment in which they're likely to have fewer children, they're likely to have more adults, and they're likely to have routines and structures that they understand. They're suddenly being moved out of that world, and in the course of as little as a day. One day they're going to daycare, next day they're in kindergarten, where suddenly there are all these little people around them who they don't know. There's only one adult to maybe 25 to 35 these days children in a very different environment where they're suddenly needing to know a whole different set of rules, a whole different set of routines. They need to go to the lunchroom. A lot of kids have never been to a cafeteria until they hit that first day of kindergarten. And then if you think about it, there are all these steps. You got to get a tray, you got to pick your milk. They're making this big leap. And so parents serve this great big purpose of being able to help children, A, anticipate that leap, B, not be anxious about it, not have it be an experience that they're going to have to worry about for days on end or worry about while it's happening, structure it up so that it's not as much of a transition, maybe do some preparatory work leading up to the transition, and make it a smoother thing for them. And I don't think that we often think about, okay, here's this huge thing coming up in children's lives, but parents, by helping children to anticipate that change and to alert them to the fact that they're going to have to pay attention to these new contingencies and this new structure and this new environment, can in fact help them make that transition a lot smoother than it might otherwise have gone. And then finally, and I say finally only because this is the end of the list of things I'm going to talk about today, not because these are the only things that parents can do to help prepare their children for school, but just simple general parenting skills make a huge difference in children's school readiness. And we know from a large body of pretty robust research, some of it originating with Jerry Patterson and John Reed and Tom DeShawn at Oregon Social Learning Center, that parents who engage in inconsistent or harsh or lax parenting, so parenting in which sometimes if a child misbehaves, they see a consequence, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes if your parent gives you directions, you need to follow those directions or you're not going to like what happens. But sometimes it doesn't matter if you follow directions. And you can imagine coming from an environment in which the information coming at you from adults doesn't particularly carry consistent consequences, you then go into a classroom environment, and why listen to the teacher? Why follow those directions? There may not be any payoff, and there may not be any consequence in your home life. So you can imagine a child would have a lot of trouble making that transition. There's also the work by Patterson and Reed showing that children who grow up with coercive parenting, or parenting in which children are able to back a parent off of needing to follow the direction by having a temper tantrum or having intensely negative behavior, learn that if they do that with adults, then they don't have to do what they're told to do. Again, you can imagine how well that plays in a kindergarten classroom. When a child throws themselves on the floor, that child is very quickly going to get marked by peers as, whoa, I don't want to deal with that. And teachers are going to have that same sort of reaction. So parenting itself. On the other hand, when you have parents who create rules that are followed consistently, so children learn that, you need to listen to directions coming from the adults in your environment, that when you do X, Y happens consistently, that it's worth inhibiting whatever behavior you want to engage in order to get this reward over here, and that you will consistently get that reward, and who have rules and routines do much better in school, both academically and socially. So these ways in which parents affect children's school readiness give us a sense of how or where we might intervene, some particular points of intervention that we might actually target in order to help parents better prepare children. So that brings up the question of how do we do that? And before I get into how, I want to talk about how working with parents may be more difficult for certain groups, and what are the barriers that might get in the way when one is trying to help parents to increase their children's school readiness. The first being that not all parents know which skills are important. I mean, as I said, we're pretty much inundated with messages that book reading is important, and that's great. But self-regulation or executive function is sort of a newer comer to the field of things that are important, and I think we've done a good job of getting that message out there. Megan's done a lot of that herself with her research, but that isn't necessarily, not all parents have necessarily heard that message yet. So those sorts of skills may not be something that parents have in their repertoire, and they may not know that that's important to be teaching their children. There's also, parents may not know how to teach the necessary skills. It's been said probably far too many times that children don't come with an instruction manual. Well, parents don't necessarily know how to scaffold up sharing for a child. There are lots of steps to these very complex behaviors, and it isn't necessarily obvious or self-evident. Then there's just lack of resources, plain old lack of money or income with which to provide experiences, whether they be trips to museums or they be high-quality early childhood education experiences. That can get in the way. Time. Parents who have low income are likely to maybe be working 2 to 3 jobs, and so when asked to sit down at the end of a 2 to 3 shift day, are they going to have the time or the energy to read to their children, or engage in the kinds of literacy activities in the day-to-day back and forth with their children that will enhance their children's school readiness skills. And then there's just experience. Again, you've got parents come with a varied set of skills themselves. They may not be very socially adept or very good at controlling their own impulses. And so you're likely to it's going to be harder for a parent who has some difficulties inhibiting their own behavior to teach their children how to inhibit their behavior. And difficulties in dealing with child behavior. So children come with varying temperaments, varying sets of skills themselves. It's going to be much harder to get a child who has a hard time sitting still to listen to a 20-minute storybook. It's going to be harder to teach them, to get them to sit still long enough to listen to directions. And so there may be, for some parents, before you can even get to literacy or before you can even get to talking about sharing, you may just need to learn to keep your hands to yourself, or you may just need to calm down long enough to sit still. And then there are cultural, language and cultural differences. So parents who are sending their children to a school in which the dominant language is not the parent's own language are likely to have some difficulties in knowing where to start or knowing how to get their own children ready. And so these kinds of barriers lead to the statement that although we know that parent involvement is really important for school readiness and for school itself, how children adjust to school, we actually know a lot less about how to do that in families that are facing higher risk factors than families that are not. Because one needs to address a whole range of other factors beneath the just preparing children themselves. But there are successful programs. One really good exemplar is Head Start. Works very hard to get parents involved in their children's school readiness and has a lot of wonderful ways in which they do that. There are parenting courses like Incredible Years that have been shown to have nice effects on children's school readiness. And then I want to tell you about our own Oregon-grown program that was developed by myself and my colleagues at Oregon Social Learning Center. We call it the Kids in Transition to School, or KITS program. And this was a program that we developed for families that were likely to be at higher risk to have children having difficulties in school. And we developed it very deliberately to center around the transition to kindergarten. So the 2 months before kindergarten in the summer, and then the 2 months right after children enter school, the first 2 months of kindergarten in the fall. And that was done with the idea that transitions in anybody's life, children, parents, can lead to chaos. And again, we're talking about children learning a great number of skills. They need to learn the new contingencies of the classroom. They need to learn about their peers. They need to learn about the new routines. Parents are trying to figure out, what are my new routines now that my child has to be in school by a certain time? How do I get them out the door in the morning with their peanut butter and jelly sandwich in one hand and both socks and their shoes? And in periods of transition and chaos, your pieces all get thrown up in the air, and they can either come down in chaos again, all mixed up, or they can come down in a nice organized pattern. And if you put an intervention into that kind of period, you may be more likely to be able to influence that pattern as things are coming down and settling out. And that was why we really targeted this particular period. We focus on that Holy Trinity, that the self-regulatory skills, the social skills, and the early literacy skills. And we have both a parent and a child component. And I'm going to talk much more today about the parent component than the child component. I will touch on the child component because we think they're both equally important. I'm not leaving one out, but this is about parenting, and it is Parenting Week, so I thought I'd tell you about that a little bit more. So we call them parent workshops, and they're 12 sessions. We meet once a week in the summer, and then once every other week in the fall. We had parent feedback that would be much better as they start the crazy school year, so we titrated back a little bit. These happen at the same time as the child activities that I'll tell you about in a few minutes. And we try to make them as easy as possible for parents to attend. So we offer free childcare for any other siblings other than the child in the program. We provide food at the meetings. We provide transportation for families, which is huge when you don't necessarily have transport of your own. And we also, if parents miss a session, we go see them, or we talk to them on the phone to provide the content, or we meet them at a coffee shop to make sure that they really get the content. Because again, if you have a fairly chaotic life, you may not be able to be on time to all the meetings, but we don't want to penalize people for that. So the topics that we cover are, probably unsurprisingly, the skills that children need for school. And we talk about how to enhance these skills. So we talk about reading, but we talk about making the most out of reading. So how, when you read, can you comment on what's going on? Can you point out letters? Can you point out shapes? Can you point out pictures? Can you move your finger around the text from left to right so that children get the idea that that's how you read? And how do you, beyond storybook reading, how do you embed learning in everyday activities? And I think as parents, it's easy to forget in the day-to-day, moving back and forth and making sure that we all have clean clothes and food, how much we in fact do as parents to help prepare children. I think parents start to feel guilty that they haven't done enough. But when you start to talk to parents, you'll find that they count the silverware when they lay the table, or when they sort that laundry, they're talking about colors to their kids, or they're going down the street and talking about, oh, that window is a rectangle and that window is a square. And so one of the things we do is just kind of make parents aware of how much they already do in their day-to-day, moving back and forth through the world. And then we talk about what they can do more. But not like chores, not making it, I've got to get my child ready for school. But how can you make it fun? What can they do? What games can they play in the car? What can they do for colors and shapes? And what can they talk about in the world that all leads to helping enhance children's learning? And then we talk about that big school readiness skill that will get them liked by both teachers and friends alike, cooperation. And how do you encourage that in children? So how do you get them to sit down to do homework? You pre-teach a skill, you figure out ways to reinforce that skill, you practice that skill, and you get children into the habit of listening to directions and following those directions. So again, when they make this transition and they're having adults tell them a lot during the day what to do, they're able to do that quickly. And in order to cooperate, you need to be able to regulate your behavior. So instead of saying no when the teacher asks you to change your seat, you're going to get up and do that. So one of the things that we talk quite a bit about is how do children handle their own frustration. And a great way to talk about frustration is to talk about homework, because that's something that children are going to encounter for the first time in school, and that is something that can be quite frustrating. It's designed to teach you something you don't know, so oftentimes that's going to be something that you're going to have some struggles with. And we do provide the children with homework on a weekly basis, so we give the child and the parent time to practice this, and we talk about when children get frustrated, what can you do? Can you take a break? Can you stop for a while? Can you talk about counting to 10? Can you breathe? Can you shrug your shoulders and say, oh, well, and let it go? Things that will allow the child to do that in the classroom, do that with the parent while you're doing homework as they get that kind of thing from school, and do that when friends don't do what you ask them to do, when they take your pencil instead of putting it down. We also talk about how to encourage new behaviors, because again, you have to often inhibit the need to go play Wii in order to do your homework. And so we talk about ways that parents can pre-teach what they're going to expect of the child. So letting the child know that homework is going to be the first thing you do when you come home. Figuring out ways to, instead of expecting the child to bite off this entire new behavior, to break it down into steps and encourage both persistence at stuff that's hard and not very interesting, and also inhibiting, as I said, the one behavior in favor of the other. And we talk about how you discourage inappropriate behaviors, because if you're going to have a time when you're going to have inappropriate behaviors, it may be during a transition when everybody's under stress, learning new behaviors at school, the parents learning this whole new school routine, and so things might go sideways. And so giving parents tools to deal with those, so whether it be timeout or whether it be consequences for misbehavior, or whether it be things like distracting or rewarding, just paying attention to the positive behaviors, really giving parents a toolkit so that as they go through this transition, they can pull out sort of the appropriate tools to fit with the situation. And then, because that was one of the things I said that parents help with, we help parents help children to anticipate the change. So talking with them about talking, how do you talk about kindergarten? How do you make it not this big, scary thing, but really exciting? And really something that's positive that the parent believes that the child can do, knows that the child can do. So it's not this sort of looming change on the horizon. And also to really set up some routines that will help make the transition a little smoother, and not to do it the night before. So we talk during the summer about what's your morning routine going to look like? What are the steps? When are you going to start? So that everybody gets to be out the door in the morning with all the things they need for the day, with the homework, with the shoes on, with the lunch, and also is in bed at night so that they're going to be able to get up the next day and do it all over again. Setting up homework routines, we've talked about. And then talking about things like making new friends, because again, this is going to be probably one of the times when a child is faced with the most new people in their lives, and talking very clearly about what it's like to make new friends, and talking to the child about those friends, as well as just how you talk to your child about school. How do you set up a time and a place so that you get to hear about the events of the day, and so that you make it clear to the child that school's important, and they want to, and you want to hear about it, as well as sort of keep those lines of communication open as the child goes through school. And that sort of comes to the last topic that we talk about, which is really how do you plan to be involved in school? Not only by asking your child about it, but also by going to the school, by introducing yourself to the teachers, and how and when might you want to approach staff when things are not going so well for your child, and how can you do that in a way that doesn't make you disliked by those staff people and teachers. And this can be really important when you're talking with parents who might have had a little bit of harder time at school themselves, and they're not wanting to go back to school. They don't want to have anything to do with it. but it is so important for their child. So working through with them what the steps might be, who they might contact, or also parents who have cultural differences with the school or language differences, identifying for them people who they can contact, who will put them in touch with then the right services or the right people. So I said I would talk about what we do for the children, and I'm going to do it fast-ish. The children, while their parents are in the workshops, are in what we call school readiness playgroups, and there are 24 sessions of these, so they meet twice a week during the summer, and then once a week during those first 2 months of school. And I have described this to many people as a practice kindergarten. And in many ways, that's what we're doing. We're conducting it in a kindergarten classroom with a schedule where we have circle time and we have art activities and we have snack time and a routine that is set and is followed every time. We focus on those early literacy, social, and self-regulation skills. And we do that not only by directly teaching them, so here's an A and this is what starts with A, but also talking. So when we teach sharing, we're directly teaching it. We're talking about what it is and why you might want to do it. But also doing things like modeling. So the teachers will show examples of good sharing and bad sharing, and children can pick and decide which one is good. And then we do an activity that involves sharing. So children will go from looking and hearing about sharing to doing alien headbands, where they have little styrofoam balls on little springs, and we get to cover them with sparkles. And there's 1 bottle of glue and 5 children sitting around a table. And so the children need to learn how to negotiate getting that bottle around to all 5 people. And lest you think that we just let them do that by themselves, we have teachers who use the same sorts of techniques that we talk about in the parenting workshops to pre-teach children what the expectation is going to be. You're going to share, just like we just talked about. Scaffold up that behavior so that if a child even pushes the glue close to their friend, they can get reinforced for doing that and reinforcing that behavior. And we really work on reinforcing behaviors, because what we want children to do is, again, be able to walk into that classroom without a lot of anticipatory anxiety, but more with this sort of, well, I've been there, I've done that, I know how to do this, I got this. And so we also, in the name of doing that in 8 short weeks, really pepper our curriculum with high-density learning activities, which is just a way of saying we never let these kids rest. Everything that we do, we try to move towards the goal of preparing them for school, so that we practice all sorts of activities across tasks. We practice sharing. We practice inhibitory control. We make sure that if we're making bracelets with beads, then we're talking about the colors, we're talking about the patterns. We have multiple transitions, because if something is going to go sideways in a kindergarten classroom, it's during that transition. You lose half your herd during moving from circle time to the snack table. And then we even utilize snack time. So no rest. During snack time, we're talking about how do you talk to your friend? Can you compliment Johnny's shirt? And then getting children into conversations and again, scaffolding that so children continue the conversation and practice their social skills. So we thought this was a good idea. We based it on research. But just because we thought it was a good idea didn't mean it would actually have anything to do with parent and child school readiness. And we've been very privileged to be able to get funding for the 2 efficacy trials I'm going to tell you about that are in now long-term follow-up. At least one of them is. And then a 3rd one that we just had the good fortune to be able to start. But these are the 2 on which we have results, and I wanted to present some of them today. The foster care study involved 192 children, not 900, I wish, who were in Lane and Marion County, and they were entering kindergarten in the fall of that year, the year that they came into the study. They were randomized to either receive the KITS play groups and parent groups or services as usual, so anything they would have otherwise gotten. And then the developmental disability study involved 209 children who had a disability or delay such that they were receiving early childhood education, special education services, but they also had significant behavioral or social difficulties that were going to interfere with the transition to kindergarten, and they were also randomized. I'm going to just say, because I'm not going to talk about the children very much, but that we have seen in both trials improvements in both early literacy and self-regulatory skills across the summer, so from baseline to just prior to school entry, and that those improvements in self-regulation persist to the end of the kindergarten year. So we see that. And that's not necessarily all that's out there. That's as far as we have analyzed the data so far. But for parenting, I'm going to talk first about the Developmental Disabilities and Delays study. And there, those children were selected because they were having behavioral difficulties. So one might imagine that their parents needed to do some controlling of behavior before we could get to school readiness skills. So we wanted to look at whether their skills in parenting improved across from baseline to the end of the summer right before they entered school. And we looked here at ineffective parenting. So parenting that was, parents would answer questions like, how often do you do what you say you're going to do if your child misbehaves? Or how often does what you do depend, or whether you pay attention to your child's behavior depend on your mood? So things that do not argue for someone for consistently tracking behavior or consistently having consequences for behavior. So we did find that across the summer, we saw decreases in this ineffective parenting. So that's what it looked like. And remember that we wanted to see decreases, so we wanted that pink line to be negative. Whereas for the group that didn't receive the parenting intervention or the KITS intervention, we saw increases in ineffective parenting. And for a lot of these parents, they didn't have services across the summer because early childhood special education tends to run on an academic calendar. So we wondered whether, and that can be quite stressful to not have your services. So that increase might be a reflection just of the increased stress on parents across the summer. But we also wondered, okay, well, if you can get your parenting to a better place where you feel like you have more control over your child's behavior and things are going better, does that then translate into gains in parent involvement? Because maybe now you're feeling like you're able to be involved in your child's schooling in ways that you might not have been before because you were tracking behavior. And in fact, what we found was that the intervention, by decreasing that ineffective parenting prior to school entry, ineffective parenting was then negatively related. So the more effective the parenting, the more parental involvement you got in kindergarten by teacher and parent report. And this is a significant indirect path from the treatment to parent involvement in kindergarten by the end of kindergarten. So in fact, by intervening on the parenting, we were able to get better outcomes in terms of parental involvement by the end of kindergarten, which is important to that question of, okay, we don't know as much about how with high-risk families to increase this parental involvement. Well, we do know quite a bit about, again, increasing general parenting skills. And if by doing that we can increase parental involvement, then we have a window into how to intervene for parents, high-risk parents. So we knew we could increase parenting skills. But when we look at children and increasing their skills across the transition or increasing their knowledge about the transition, that's another thing that we really target in this intervention. We wondered whether by doing that we could actually help the way that children made the transition. And maybe we could even do it at a neurobiological level, at the way that the kids respond not only behaviorally. We knew we were increasing early literacy and self-regulation, but could we do it at a physiological level? And the way that we measured how kids were responding was to take salivary cortisol, or spit, which is lots of fun to collect from 5-year-olds. But the thing about salivary cortisol is it's the thing that gets you up and going. It's the thing that prepares you to react. But it also has this nice diurnal rhythm across the day. So typically, we start out high at the beginning of the day because we need to get up, we need to get ready, we need to be ready to tackle whatever tasks that we have to do for the day. But then by the end of the day, and I'm remembering to use my pointer because people are watching live, we're coming back down because we don't need to be up and excited all evening long. We need to go to sleep, and we need to get ready to tackle another day. And so if you think about it, though, on special days, like the day that we go to school for the first time, we want to be more alert and we want to be more prepared to face that day because there are going to be all these new rules, there are going to be all these new people, so we want to be like sponges and we want to be able to take that in and ready to receive that information. And if we know to anticipate that, then we're more likely to be ready. So what studies have shown with children who are typically developing on the first day of school, they wake up more ready to go. So they have a higher level of cortisol in the mornings, and they have a steeper decline across the day. Because, again, you don't want to stay jazzed up all day. You need to go to sleep after that day in which you've been learning all the new rules and meeting all your new friends and be able to go to the next day. And furthermore, you don't want to continue to be ready to face the day because you want school to become sort of routine and you don't want elevated levels of cortisol forever. It's not good for you. So by the 5th day of school, you want to be coming back down and going towards a more normal cortisol level. So what we did was to look at the children in our foster care study across the transition to school and take diurnal salivary cortisol samples. We started by looking at what they looked like at the beginning of the summer, so before any intervention, and sort of typical days for them. And you'll see that the children who received the intervention are here in blue, and the children who did not are here in red. And what you see is your typical pattern. There's no differences between the groups. The kids are a little bit lower. On the first day of school, however, and I just want to reiterate here that what we're looking at is a change in pattern for individuals. So we're not necessarily looking at group differences here in terms of absolute levels, but we're looking at slope. So how we change across the course of the day. And the kids were a little bit higher and had a steeper slope that comes down faster and further on day 1. And that was a difference, that there's a significant increase or negative slope for the children in the KITS group. And then by the 5th day, you see that they're sliding back down to where they were before. Whereas this group of children who did not receive the intervention pretty much don't change across the time. So one would translate that into the kids who were in the intervention were more able to become sponges on that first day. They were more alert, they were more aware of it, they were more they knew what to anticipate, and they knew that this was going to be important because we talked to them about it endlessly over the course of the summer, as well as teaching their parents to talk about it and to get ready for it. But that's great, and it's good that they were aware of the transition, but did it make any difference? So we looked at, here's again, we want this to be negative because we're having a negative effect on slope so that it gets steeper. But by the end of the year, in kindergarten spring, when we asked the teachers about how the kids were doing and what their oppositional and aggressive behavior looked like, having no change or a more positive slope led to more oppositional and aggressive behavior. So that by making that slope steeper and more negative, we were affecting, or they were less likely to have oppositional and aggressive behavior by the end of the year. And in fact, that mediates. There isn't a direct effect here, but that mediated, that change, that physiological change that we made, mediated the behavior, the effect at the end of the school year. So overall, from these results and others, we can see that if you use a relatively short-term targeted intervention, you can in fact produce changes both in parenting skills and parent involvement over the short term, and that there are corresponding changes in those children's school readiness skills, and in fact in their physiological response. So it's sort of becoming embodied as well as in their skills in response to the transition to kindergarten. So we can move children's skills and their school readiness by working with their parents. And we know this, as I said, not only from this program, but from other programs out there in the world. So that kind of answers our why, about why would we want to do it. Well, because parents do make this huge difference, and there are these points of intervention, and we know that we can do it through a variety of programs. But what I find really exciting these days is the fact that there's the why and the how. You can know how to do it, but you can have absolutely no support in the world to do it. So we could have the best programs that one could think of, and if people aren't willing to get them out into the world and implement them, then we're in trouble. But being in Oregon right now is, in fact, I think one of the better places to be, because if you look at the things that are going on in this state in terms of initiatives to get parent education out there, and in particular in order to help children get ready for school, it's kind of amazing. I mean, we've got the Early Learning Council at the state level that's really working to streamline the programs and get behind and observe what programs there are already out there and help get them out to folks. We've got the Oregon Parenting Education Collaborative that's right here, as well as that's also funded by the 4 of the largest foundations in Oregon, and is really working to be able to fund and increase the capacity of communities all over Oregon to provide parenting education. United Way down in Lane County has developed their Promised Neighborhoods initiative, in which they're targeting 2 neighborhoods that have high levels of poverty and very low levels of school readiness traditionally in the schools in those neighborhoods, and really working to knit together programs to support families from cradle to college. So not only making sure that families are ready to go to school, but that they can continue through school with the best possible success rates. You've got Oregon Community Foundation's prenatal to third grade alignment grants, which are looking at ways in which schools can team up with early childhood educators to make sure, again, that there's a seamless transition across the preschool and prenatal, toddler, infancy years, all the way out to third grade, so that those groups are partnering and working together to bring families and children along that continuum as seamlessly as possible. And then Connected Lane County is 0 to beyond college. So a partnership of educators and community organizations that's really looking at how do children and families get services all the way through, and how can we can help families do their best from early childhood through elementary and middle school into high school with the goal of college, and then get through college and be able to have the best adult outcomes possible. So you've got, and this is just the picture of things I know about and have had the great privilege to be involved in some way. There's stuff going on all over the state, so I don't mean to offend anybody by leaving them out, but this is just more exciting than words can say, because we are prepared. There are sparks flying all over this state to get the kinds of programs that parents and children need going. And why I find this so exciting is a study that we did recently at Oregon Social Learning Center. And this was a study of boys who began the study when they were in 4th grade, so about 30 years ago this year. And David Kerr is actually going to talk tomorrow about some of his really fabulous work with this sample. But we decided, okay, we'll look at how the dads did. So they were dads. Look at how they did in their middle school and high school years. And then we'll look at how their children did in their 2nd grade year. And so there's anywhere from 5 to 20 years separating these 2 groups of people. It isn't as if the fathers, there's not a short span of time. And there's every reason why how the fathers did in their school years should have nothing to do with how their children did, because it's a huge span of time and there are all sorts of other things going on. But in fact, for both academic and social adjustment, there was a direct effect of how well the fathers did when they were kids on how well their children were doing. And it was even controlling for things. I mean, you could say, okay, yeah, well, it's just because they have the same sort of intelligence, or, oh, well, it's just because of what the fathers did educationally. But no, that isn't the whole story. There is an effect of how school went for those dads on how well their children do. And so you can look at that and go, whew, well, that's depressing, because that means that, how if they were cut-ups in school, if they did really poorly, well, their kids are going to do poorly. Or you can look at that as like a huge opportunity, because what it means is that if we get these parents in a first generation, and we give them an intervention so that their kid is affected. So what we're assuming there, right, is that we give an intervention and we kind of pop up that trajectory. So the child who might have done okay in their school years and they would have graduated high school, now they're graduating college. So we've done a good thing. I mean, we've changed somebody's trajectory for the positive. But what it actually means is that we get something that's not all that well known in intervention. We get like a twofer, because we affect not only that child, but that child's unborn child, potentially. So 2 for 1, or 3 for 1, or 4 for 1, depending on how many children that child has. So we're making a difference with whatever interventions we have, not only in that child's life, so already the future, but in potentially the futures of their unborn children coming up. So every time we pop a trajectory up, we're popping up these future trajectories. And that is a huge return on an investment. If you think about it, to be able to not only affect the children that we know and we see in front of us today, but the children who are up and coming in the world. And so we know why we would intervene with parents, why we would want to help them be able to help their children's, or better their children's school readiness. And we have some idea of how. And we have this great state of Oregon right now that's just poised with all these initiatives to really get involved and support this. So I think, thinking about that, there's really only one question that's left. And that's, how could we not? How could we not put forth the resources and the research and the support to be able to not only affect the children of this up-and-coming generation and their parents, but those going forward, and to make a huge positive difference for multiple generations of Oregonians. So, thank you for your time and attention. I just want to acknowledge that I don't do this by myself at all. I have a huge number of partners and collaborators and funders who help me out, and this is just for the 2 efficacy trials that I was talking about. I also have wonderful community partners out there, and I would happily entertain questions. Even from the live stream.
Question here. I have a question on the foster care study. So the parents in that intervention were the foster parents?
Sometimes. We also, if they made transitions during the time that we had them, we took on, it was, yes, whoever was caring for them, but it could have been biological parents as well. We tried to catch anybody up on as much curriculum as they'd missed and keep going from whatever point they entered the study. Yes?
So this way, how did you recruit the families for the studies?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question, because as we've gone through studies, we've realized how good we had it when we were doing the foster care study and the study of developmental disabilities, because there are lists out there of who's in foster care and who's receiving early childhood special education. So we partner with DHS or with Early Childhood Cares, which is the agency in Lane County that provides EI services. And we were able to contact parents through the lists of children who were involved. And then we'd call them, see if they were interested, and then we'd do a home visit so we could explain the study and the consent forms, because that's a lot of information to have. But now we are doing an efficacy trial in low-income neighborhoods, the promised neighborhoods that I referred to, and there are no lists of kindergartners. So now we go door to door every spring and knock on doors and ask people politely if they have a kindergartner lurking somewhere around, and contact families who then register for kindergarten. But it has impressed upon me just how lucky we were when we had populations that could easily be named and found.
And this is a question from online. Did you have any difficulty accommodating working parents and kids?
Yes and no, because we needed to accommodate them. That's a really good question. And what we do is we hold evening groups where we have the parents come in and they can bring their children and have childcare, and then we usually feed them because it's dinner time. And we also, for families that can't do either a daytime or an evening time, again, we will go visit them or we'll call them. So we really try everything possible to get the content to the families.
And also, do you have any difficulty with retention rates for children or their parents?
Well, difficulty. We do a lot of things to, as I say, make it easy for them to do the intervention. And then in order to try to continue to communicate with them and keep them appraised of what's going on in the study, we'll do newsletters, we send birthday cards, we offer a small incentive if when they move, they call us and let us know what their new address or their new phone number is. So we have actually pretty high retention rates in the 90%, but we have to work to do it. And these are families where mobility is something that happens a lot because low income or children in foster care change caregivers quite a bit. But every time they change, we try to recruit the new caregiver. Yes? Well, we've been very fortunate that the foster care study is actually still ongoing. So we will be able to see all those children through to 5th grade and some of them through as far as 8th grade. So they're enrolling cohorts. So some of them will be 8th graders, but everybody will get through to 5th grade. And we'd like to do the same with the developmental disability study, but we need funding, which is harder to come by these days than I like to think about. But yes, I think that it's really important to look at long-term effects of any intervention.
And that's related to another question about the total cost of the KIDS program.
Well, we're actually in the midst of conducting a cost-effectiveness study, so that will be out soon. And we'll give some idea of cost effectiveness and what that costs in proportion to what we get back. Yes, ma'am.
I never know. I don't know if I've heard this or not before, but maybe from something Phil said. But do you have any evidence that the parents participating in KIDS it decreased the number of placements for foster care kids? He's got evidence that the multidimensional treatment foster care does, which is much more heavy duty for foster parents and has 24/7 case management, et cetera. I don't know that I think that KIDS would decrease placement changes. I mean, it would be great if it did, but it's a little bit too short term, and our primary interest there was upping parent involvement and upping the kids' skills. But yes, but his study definitely that intervention does. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your attention and time.